Today, we'll uncover the fascinating world of 17th and 18th century European aristocracy, where even the simplest objects, mirrors, pineapples, and wigs, held immense social power. From their ancient roots to becoming the ultimate symbol of status and luxury during the reign of King Louis XIV, wigs were more than just a fashion statement. Find out how these powdered masterpieces came to represent wealth, power, and prestige, and why their influence faded over time. The Versailles court of Louis XIV was the pinnacle of elegance and refinement. The young king began using hairpieces to disguise his hair loss when he was 17 years old in the 1650s, and by the time he was in his 30s, he had switched to beautifully coiffed statement wigs. These wigs, called peruques, quickly became a popular fad among his courtiers and nobles, and were an essential component of his regal image. The hair disorders of both kings are thought to have been brought on by syphilis and its treatments. King Louis popularized wigs in France at the same time that his cousin King Charles II of England started wearing them to hide his prematurely graying hair. Similar to France, wigs were a defining feature of the English royal court in the middle of the 19th century and swiftly gained popularity in English culture. Human hair wigs continued to be the primary emblem of wealth, prestige, and professionalism, even when inferior wigs made of horse or goat hair found their way down to the merchant class. It was customary practice to powder wigs starting around 1700. The main reason for this was hygienic. The powder, which was often produced from bean or maize flour, assisted in absorbing smells and oils. It was also thought that the white powder gave the wigs a refined appearance. Wigs began as a fashion trend, but eventually became a standard in the English legal profession. In order to stand out from the crowd and to present an air of independence, authority, and privacy, judges and attorneys started to wear them. The American colonies were still ruled by the British at the time, and the habit of wearing wigs spread across the Atlantic along with English legal and customary practices in the first part of the 18th century. Although in a more restrained manner than the French and British, American judges and attorneys followed the pattern throughout the 1700s. Members of the political elite, including well-known founding fathers like James Madison and John Adams, often wore wigs. Wigs had lost favor among males in both Europe and the United States by the time of the American Revolution and the United States' independence from England. Although many of the men in early paintings of America's founding fathers have white hair, wigs had mostly been replaced by powder and pomade by this point. This haircut allowed the young country to defy English customs while expressing the same majestic rank that wigs had long represented. Even though they were becoming less popular with the general public, wigs were nevertheless worn in courtrooms when the U.S. Supreme Court met for the first time in 1790. Justice William Cushing showed up to the court wearing the white wig he had worn in Massachusetts. For heaven's sake, discard the monstrous wig which makes the English judges look like rats peeping through bunches of oakum, Cushing was told by Thomas Jefferson, who was thought to have worn hairpieces for a brief period in the mid-1700s, indicating that he was ready to move on. Although most men in Europe and America had abandoned wearing wigs by the early 19th century, the custom endured in England, where they are still used in courtrooms today. The United Kingdom ruled in 2007 that barristers in civil and family law courts were no longer required to wear wigs, except for criminal trials and some ceremonial occasions, where judges and attorneys are still required to wear wigs. The UK Supreme Court adopted this ruling. Wigs are still frequently used in English courtrooms, despite the lack of rules for general trials. This custom also persisted in other former British colonies. Wigs were phased away in Canada during the 19th and 20th centuries, but it wasn't until 2011 that the custom was discontinued in Ireland and Jamaica. Bench wigs and the more formal full-bottomed wigs are still worn in Australia today. Despite debates concerning the headgear's appropriateness and relevance in post-colonial times, as well as how hot the extra hair is in warm regions, nations like Ghana, Zimbabwe, and Kenya continue to utilize it in courtrooms throughout Africa.